I'm 61. I wasn't lonely. I was invisible. People didn't look at me, they looked through me, like I was part of the wall, the coffee counter, the noise. And I got used to it. Too used to it. Until one ordinary morning cracked my life open. I was standing in line for my usual black coffee, in my same old jacket, with my same old thoughts about a house that stays too quiet at night, when she turned around and looked straight at me. Not past me. Not politely. Straight. Then she said, "Excuse me, what's your name?" The question was so simple it knocked the breath out of me. My name, my real name, felt like something I hadn't used in years, like it belonged to a younger man who still believed he mattered. For a second it got stuck in my throat. Then I said it anyway. Michael. She smiled, like she'd just found something she'd been looking for. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, small, but unmistakable. Like a light coming on in a room I'd forgotten existed. My name is Michael. I'm 61 years old. I've lived alone for 9 years. My kids are grown, scattered across states, busy with careers and their own storms. They call once a week, ask if I'm doing okay, and I always tell them yes. It's not exactly a lie. It's just incomplete. My days are built out of routines that don't require anyone else. Coffee, a newspaper I barely finish, a slow walk around the neighborhood, and a few hours at my friend Frank's shop, small engine repairs, lawn equipment, anything with bolts that still make sense. At night, I watch TV with the volume low, like I'm trying not to disturb the emptiness. I never thought of myself as a tragic man. I didn't sit around feeling sorry for myself. I just faded, quietly. Over time, you learn how to take up less space. You learn how to nod and smile and keep moving. And you stop expecting anyone to ask you anything personal. So when she asked my name, it felt illegal, like she'd crossed an invisible line no one crossed anymore. I noticed her after that. Or maybe she'd been there for a while, and my life had been too gray to register her. She started showing up at the café around the same time I did. Always neat, not flashy. The kind of woman who didn't need to prove anything. 57, I would learn later. Calm eyes. A face that had seen disappointment but refused to live inside it. Her hair was pinned back in a simple way that made me think she was practical, and tired of pretending she wasn't. The first few days, it was just small talk. Weather. Coffee. How the city keeps changing, and yet the same people keep walking the same streets like they're on rails. But the thing that got me wasn't what she said. It was how she listened. Not the listening people do while they're waiting to talk. Real listening. Like my words didn't bounce off her and fall to the floor. Like they landed somewhere. One morning, she did something that made my hands go cold around the cup. She took her drink and walked over to my table. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. I looked around like she must be talking to someone else. No one sits with a man like me unless they need something. Directions, a favor, a free dose of kindness. I cleared my throat. "No," I said. "Go ahead." She sat down across from me, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And I suddenly became aware of everything. The way my shirt collar sat, the roughness of my hands, the fact that I hadn't laughed hard in months. My heart was beating too loud for my age. I didn't want it to. I didn't want to be the kind of man who gets shaken by a smile. But there I was, shaken. "Michael," she said, like she was testing the sound of it. "It suits you." I gave a small, careful smile. "And you are?" She paused just long enough to make me feel like her name mattered. "Claire," she said. "I've seen you here for a while." The words hit me harder than they should have. Seen you. Not past you. Not ignored you. Seen you. I should have kept it light. I should have joked. Instead I heard myself say, "Most people don't." Her expression changed, softened, but didn't pity me. "That's their loss," she replied. Then she looked down at her coffee, like she'd said something true and didn't want to over-explain it. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing dramatic. No grand confession. Just two people trading pieces of ordinary life. But when she stood up to leave, she touched the edge of the table lightly, an unconscious gesture, as if anchoring herself, and said, "See you tomorrow, Michael." Tomorrow. The word followed me all day like a warm coat I hadn't worn in years. I didn't know anything about her past yet. I didn't know there was a man who still thought He had a claim on her. I didn't know that asking my name was the first move in a story that would test every quiet rule I'd built to survive. All I knew was this: for the first time in a long time, I felt present. And being seen, really seen, was both terrifying and beautiful. I didn't expect to miss her. That was the part that scared me. One conversation shouldn't do that to a man my age. One shared table, a few smiles, a name spoken gently, and suddenly the next morning felt heavier if she wasn't there yet. I caught myself standing in line, checking the door like a teenager waiting for someone who might not show up. That's when I knew something had changed. Not in the world. In me. The next day, Claire arrived later than usual. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was ridiculous. Then she walked in, shook the rain from her coat, spotted me, and smiled like she was relieved I was still there. That smile landed somewhere deep in my chest. "I was afraid I'd missed you," she said as she set her cup down across from mine. I laughed, a quiet sound I hadn't practiced in a while. "I'm hard to miss," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "I disagree." We talked longer that morning. About work. She did accounting for a small medical office. About how mornings feel different when you're not rushing anywhere. About aging parents, grown children, and the strange quiet that sneaks in when life stops asking for so much from you. There was no flirting, not really. Just warmth. Presence. The kind of attention that doesn't demand anything back. And somehow, that made it intimate. By the end of the week, coffee had turned into a routine we shared. Same table. Same time. Sometimes silence, sometimes stories. I learned she liked crossword puzzles, but never finished them. She learned I rebuilt an engine once just to prove I still could. One morning, as she stirred her coffee, she said, "You know what I like about you, Michael?" The question tightened my shoulders. Compliments feel dangerous when you've gone a long time without them. "What's that?" I asked. "You don't perform," she said. "You're just here." I didn't know how to respond to that. No one had ever described me that way. Being just here used to feel like failure. Coming from her, it felt like enough. It was around then that I noticed him. The first time, he stood across the street when we left the café together. Tall. Well-dressed. Not trying to hide. Just watching. Claire noticed him too. Her shoulders tightened. Her step slowed. "Do you know him?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. "That's my ex-husband." The word ex should have made me relax. It didn't. "He still checks in," she added, her voice carefully neutral. "Sometimes more than I'd like." I told myself it wasn't my place to feel anything about that. I wasn't her partner. I was just a man who shared coffee. But when I saw him again the next week, this time inside the cafe, taking a seat too close, speaking to her with the confidence of someone who believed he belonged there, something ugly stirred in my chest. He barely looked at me. When he did, it was the way men look at furniture. After he left, Claire stared into her cup for a long moment. "He doesn't like that I'm happy without him," she said quietly. I surprised myself by answering, "He doesn't get to decide that." She looked up at me then. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Not about him. About me. About what this was becoming. The following days were careful. She still came. Still smiled. But something hovered between us. Distance, thin but real. I understood it. I was safe. Familiar. And suddenly, maybe a risk. One evening, as we stood outside the cafe, she touched my arm, not accidentally, not briefly. "I need you to know," she said, "I'm not looking for complications." I nodded. Neither am I. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. That night, alone in my quiet house, I realized something I hadn't prepared for. I wasn't just enjoying her company. I was hoping. And hope, at 61, is a dangerous thing. I almost walked away before anything real had a chance to happen. That's the truth I don't like admitting. At 61, you learn how to exit quietly, before embarrassment, before disappointment, before hope gets ideas. And for a few days, that's exactly what I tried to do. I showed up later. I chose a different table. I told myself I was being respectful, mature, sensible. But what I was really doing was retreating. because wanting her was starting to feel dangerous. Claire noticed, of course. She always did. One morning, she didn't sit down right away. She stood beside my table, one hand resting on the chair. "Did I do something?" she asked softly. The question caught me off guard. Men like me aren't used to being checked on. "No," I said too quickly. "I just didn't want to complicate things for you." She studied me for a moment, then sat anyway. "You don't get to decide that alone," she said. There was no accusation in her voice, just honesty. We sat in silence longer than usual. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. Finally, she spoke. "I spent a long time with someone who made everything feel heavy," she said. "I promised myself I wouldn't do that again." I nodded. "I'm not heavy," I replied. Then I surprised both of us by adding, "I'm just careful." She smiled at that. A small, knowing smile. "So am I," she said. That week, we stopped pretending it was just coffee. We took walks after. Slow ones. The kind where conversation drifts and comes back on its own. She told me about the years she'd spent shrinking to keep the peace. I told her about the way silence had slowly replaced expectation in my life. One afternoon, as we crossed the street together, she slipped her arm through mine without thinking. It was simple, casual, and it sent a shock straight through me. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. We kept walking like that, two people pretending their bodies hadn't noticed something their minds were still negotiating. The first time I kissed her wasn't dramatic. No fireworks. No sudden music. We were standing outside her car after a long conversation about nothing important. She laughed at something I said, looked up at me, and for a second didn't move away. I leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to stop me. She didn't. The kiss was brief, gentle, more question than answer. When we pulled back, she rested her forehead against mine. "That felt right," she said. I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. That's when everything started to feel real. And real things attract resistance. Her ex didn't disappear. He called more. Showed up unannounced. One evening, as I walked her to her door, he was already there, leaning against his car, arms crossed, confidence intact. "You must be Michael," he said, extending a hand that felt more like a challenge than a greeting. I shook it anyway. "You seem nice," he continued, eyes flicking toward Claire. "But this phase won't last." Claire stiffened. I felt the urge to step back, to let this be between them. Instead, I said quietly, "I'm not a phase." He smiled thinly. "We'll see." After he left, Claire closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't have to deal with this." I looked at her then, really looked. At the woman who had asked my name when no one else bothered. "I want to," I replied. The words surprised me with their steadiness. That night, lying in bed, I realized something that scared me more than being alone ever had. I wasn't just visible anymore. I was invested. And once your heart steps forward, there's no safe way to pull it back. I told myself I was being noble. That's the lie men my age tell when fear dresses up like dignity. After that night with her ex in the driveway, something inside me started calculating exits again. I slept less, thought more, replayed every word he'd said, every look Claire hadn't meant for me to notice. And the conclusion I kept reaching was simple and brutal. She didn't need another complication, and I was becoming one. The hook was subtle. It always is. I started answering messages later. I suggested shorter walks. I laughed a little less. Claire noticed the shift before I did. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the light fade, she didn't fill the silence like she usually did. She let it stretch until it became uncomfortable. "You're pulling away," she said finally. I opened my mouth to deny it. Then I closed it. "I'm trying to be realistic," I said instead. She turned toward me. "About what?" I looked at my hands. They looked old to me in that moment. Useful, worn, replaceable. "About where this leads," I said. "About what you deserve." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just said, "You don't get to decide what I deserve." That landed harder than anything her ex had said. We sat there for a long time after that. When we stood to leave, she hugged me, longer than usual. Not desperate. Not clinging. Just solid. And that somehow made things worse. A few days later, I didn't go to the cafe at all. I told myself it was work. Then weather. Then fatigue. The truth was, I didn't trust myself not to want more if I saw her. That morning, Frank cornered me in the shop. "You look like hell," he said, wiping grease off his hands. Frank's known me 30 years. He doesn't soften things. I shrugged. "Just tired." He stared at me for a moment, then said, "You finally meet someone who makes you smile, and you start disappearing. You trying to prove something." I snapped back, sharper than I meant to. "I'm 61. I'm not proving anything." He nodded slowly. "Exactly," he said. "So why are you hiding?" That question followed me home. It followed me into the quiet kitchen, the ticking clock, the empty chair across from me. That night, Claire called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I haven't seen you." I swallowed. "I think we need to slow down," I said. The words sounded rehearsed. "Cowardly." "Why?" she asked. I searched for a reason that wouldn't hurt her. "Because I don't want to get in the way of your life," I said. There was a pause. Then, very calmly, she replied, "You're not in the way, Michael. You are part of it." I almost told her everything then. Almost. Instead, I said goodnight. After I hung up, I sat in the dark longer than I cared to admit. 2 days later, there was a knock on my door. Not loud. Not urgent. When I opened it, Claire was standing there. No anger. No tears. Just resolve. "You don't get to disappear without a conversation," she said. I stepped aside. We sat at my small kitchen table, the one I never used for company. She looked around, taking in the quiet, the order, the absence of another life. "You think you're protecting me," she said gently. "But what you're really protecting is yourself." I nodded. "I don't want to lose you," I admitted. "Then stop leaving," she said. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't hold each other. We just sat there, hands close but not touching, and spoke the truth out loud. For the first time in years, I didn't choose the safe exit. And that terrified me more than being invisible ever had. I thought the hardest part would be choosing her. I was wrong. The hardest part was believing I was allowed to stay once she chose me to. At 61, you don't fear heartbreak the way you do at 30. You fear becoming small again. You fear losing the version of yourself that finally stepped into the light. After that night at my kitchen table, things didn't magically become easy. Claire didn't move in. We didn't make promises we couldn't keep. What we did instead was quieter and braver. We showed up. Every day. Sometimes together. Sometimes just aware of each other moving through separate hours. Her ex made one last attempt. He showed up unannounced again, this time asking to talk like adults. Claire didn't look at me for permission. She didn't need it. She told him calmly that the door was closed. Not slammed. Closed. When she came back inside, her hands were shaking slightly. I wrapped my arms around her, and she leaned into me like she'd been waiting to exhale all day. We stood there like that for a long moment. No words. Just certainty. Weeks passed. Then months. Life settled into something that felt almost ordinary. And that's how I knew it was real. Mornings with coffee at my place now, the table finally used for two. Walks that ended with laughter instead of questions. Evenings where we didn't fill the silence because we didn't have to. One night, as we lay side by side listening to rain hit the windows, she turned to me and said, "You know, you didn't save me." I smiled faintly. "Good," I said. "I wouldn't want that job." She reached for my hand. "But you stayed," she added. And that mattered more than any grand gesture ever could. I started noticing changes in myself too. I stood a little straighter. I spoke up more. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. Frank noticed it before I did. "You look alive," he said one afternoon, tossing me a rag. About time. Claire met my kids a few weeks later. No tension. No performance. Just warmth. Watching her talk with my daughter in the kitchen, laughing softly, I felt something settle into place. Not excitement. Not adrenaline. Peace. One morning, months after she first asked my name, we were back in that same café. Same counter. Same line. She turned to me, the way she had that first day, and smiled. "Excuse me," she said playfully. "Do you come here often?" I laughed, really laughed. The sound surprised me. "Only when I'm trying to remember who I am," I replied. She leaned in and kissed my cheek, right there in front of everyone. No drama. No hiding. Just presence. And no one looked through me anymore. Maybe they never did. Maybe I just hadn't believed I deserved to be seen. I'm 61. I wasn't lonely. I was invisible. Until a woman asked my name. And instead of disappearing when it mattered most, I finally stayed.